All right, first process, develop project charter. Foundational document directly links the project to the strategic objectives of the organization. All right, remember that, links the project to the strategic objectives. Now this word, high level, I want you to highlight or underline that word. High level details. Highlight or underline that word. Why didn't that work? There we go. High level details. On the exam, the only place that you're going to see high level is the initiating process group. And there's only two processes: develop charter, identify stakeholders. It's going to be the charter. When you see the word high level, we are talking about the charter for the exam. Everything else is detailed. You start planning, it becomes detailed. All right. So for the exam, the moment you see the word high level, you know that we are talking about the charter. So there goes our high level scope, schedule, budget, right? The project of the service and the result, right? What are we actually going to achieve here? Right, and your project should let you know what the purpose is, as we've talked about earlier. But now here's sort of your out of scope that we come up with. We evolve that from our boundaries. What will we not do? What will we not attempt to do? Right. So it's really important that we call that out. It's also important that we understand what the approval requirements and exit criteria is. When we see exit criteria, think we're exiting from one phase into the next, or we're completing the project, right? How do we know, sort of the definition of done is what we'll call that, in the Agile world. How do we know we're truly done? Is it that, if I have somebody come in and install a new light fixture, is it done when they install it, or is it truly done when they turn a switch on and validate that the light works? So that's the idea here, is how will we know that our project is successful? All right. So once the sponsor approves it, then the project is authorized. You can use company resources, and you have your level of authority. Without an approved charter, there's no project.
And by approved, you mean approved by the sponsor?
Correct. Only person that signs the charter is the sponsor, and the sponsor only. So PMI is going to try to give you questions where they make it seem like it's the key stakeholders, or let's say that the CEO in his E team. Well, no, if it's the CEO, then the CEO is just the sponsor. It's not the COO or the CFO. Even though they're very key stakeholders, right? So the charter only. The sponsor only signs the charter. You'll also get questions on the exam that will describe a project as if it's in flight, and say that, you're the PM for XYZ company. You notice that the team has been working diligently to capture requirements and understand stakeholder needs. You go to the project files and notice that a project charter doesn't exist. You should A, develop one. B, inform the sponsor that a charter doesn't exist. C, call a meeting to create the charter. D, the project is already running, do nothing. So you have A, create one. B, inform the sponsor, hey, there's no charter. C, call a meeting to create one. Or D, the project is already in flight, we don't need one, do nothing. What would you do?
B, create one.
You create one?
Create one.
Create one? Then create one?
Yep.
I would inform the sponsor.
Okay. And that's the answer they're going to want us to pick. And that's where they'll lead us down to, because in the practical application of it, that's kind of how it would go. You kind of would go back to the sponsor and say, hey, don't we do charters? What's up here? Before you actually go and make an effort to create one. You might just go, if you were able to do that. But the answer for PMI is going to be create one. So just remember that for the exam, you're in a strong matrix environment. I mentioned this yesterday. I'm going to mention it every class so that you remember. You're in a strong matrix environment. You have 200 resources, $10 million budget, 1-year project, and you're assertive. You must be an assertive project manager. So you're going to want to always pick the response that you don't just inform the sponsor. You inform the sponsor and get sign off. Or you don't just call a meeting, you call a meeting and document decisions and actions, right? So when you see answers on the exam, always pick the one where you're being the most aggressive, the most assertive. taking the most action. All right, so no charter, no project. Remember that for the next 3 weeks. Because let me ask you all, what do charters look like? Like Maggie, what does a charter for you look like?
For ours, it's usually an RFP. So we tend to have bids, and then we negotiate a contract directly with the client.
And then that becomes the charter itself. Mm-hmm. Is that fair to say same for you guys, Ryan, Dana, Chris? No?
No, I would say we don't create a charter for every project, to be honest. But when we do, it's usually for our larger projects, and they do typically fall within the bullets on this slide, where we talk about what's in scope, what's out of scope, communication protocol, the core team members, performance measures on how do we measure whether or not this project is successful, those types of things. So I think we cover those items, but we just don't do it every time.
Right. And so I bring that up because that's the whole point, is that for the exam, you do it every time. All right. So just remember, for the next 3 weeks, we always have charters. Okay. So when we create the charter, we would take something like an agreement, in this case, a contract, some statement of work, RFP, whatever it may be, a proposal that's been accepted. You'll have some business documents. So in this case, this might already exist. Hey, we're going after this particular RFP. We're going after this particular client or customer because of this. And if we're successful, we're going to get that. That's the benefits management plan, right? So these are sort of the reasons for pursuing the project. You would take that as an input. And then if someone agrees to your project, you would take that as an input as well. You would look at the things that are out of your control within your company, like the software that you're using and the infrastructure that the company has and how your team's dispersed. You might look at the external EEFs, like market forces and the legal requirements that you have. You look at the OPAs. Okay, what tools and templates exist? What policies exist for the company? Because some of these may be detrimental to my project, right? So what the company has may not be of use, or it may be of great use. So you want to take all that into account. And then we'll use our expert judgment, gather data, and we'll use our interpersonal team skills and meetings. And so let's talk about that. So in terms of expert judgment, this is like the subject matter expertise again, right? So you might call in folks who have specific knowledge about this type of project. You might call in the folks who are the key stakeholders because they're certainly experts in what they want, right? You might go out and hire other consultants, and all of those people are gonna, you're gonna use their expert judgment. And then in terms of data gathering, when you're developing a charter, think of it as like, you're in a room, and you maybe have a team who's working on a whiteboard. You maybe have another team reviewing plans. You maybe have another team in the room that's just sort of having a small conversation. And can you, as the PM, work the room? Can you, working with somebody here at the whiteboard, hear the conversation what's going on here and say, okay, guys, hold up, I'll be right back, and come here and say, hey guys, I noticed you mentioned this, but that doesn't really define well. I think we're really talking about that. Can you keep everybody on the same page? Can you get folks from IT and finance and legal and HR and be the common unification in terms of the language and their understanding? And so that's you sort of using your interpersonal and team skills, facilitating that meeting, even managing conflict, because conflict is good, right? It's how we innovate. And so, that's the idea of how you would take all of these documents, get everybody into a room, or maybe over the course of, a few days, over the course of weeks, whatever it may be, but you sort of facilitate the development of this charter, and then that's where you get the output. And every process that we're going to go through moving forward follows this same logic. You as a PM, you're going to gather some sort of information. And for the most part, after this being the very first process that we're going to go through, for the most part, these inputs that we're going to see are going to be outputs from the previous process. And you'll see that moving forward, right? So we take some documents, we're going to work with people, and we're going to create another document or some deliverable. And then at the next process, we're going to take that deliverable, work with some people, and then create another deliverable. And it's going to go on and on and on. So we're going to keep following this process. So here's what a charter may look like. milestones, achievement, goals. You know, for some of you guys that do work breakdown structure, a WBS dictionary might look like this. So I'm going to mention that term now because we may see that either today or in the beginning of next Saturday. But
Hey,
this is what a
CJ,
charter.
question on this. So I know that the sponsor is the only signatory party required for a charter to be official. But oftentimes when we're doing projects, our clients will have a steering team.
Mm-hmm.
And typically we'll get every member of the steering team to sign off on the charter just so that they all buy in. So PMI is saying that that's not necessary as long as the top person is signing it. We don't care about all the ancillary people signing. That's fine and dandy, but it's not necessary.
Yeah, in so many words, PMI as an organization, kind of their approach is this: it's the sponsor signature is mandatory, and then however you think it's appropriate for you to do it, then you do it that way. So I will say, in healthcare, that's very common. You know, in the group that I'm working with, you know, we have not just the sponsor, we have about 7 or 8 signatures, for that charter. So yeah, it's not uncommon, but you're right. For PMI, they're just not going to say, PMI never tells you what to do or how to do it. They just say you need a charter. All right. And again, you may get a question where a charter is simply just an email. I can send John an email that says, John, you've been assigned to this project. Here's the scope, schedule, budget, risk, that can be a charter too.
Okay.
Okay. So the PM should be identified and assigned as early as possible, preferably during the charter development. There's a little clue here because you're going to get questions on the exam where you've been placed into a project or you're taking over a project or somebody left, or you're being promoted. So a charter may already exist. So think about that. And here you'll get questions on the exam. And just remember, if the first thing you want to see is does a charter exist? And if it doesn't exist, go create one. So just for the exam, just remember that. If it doesn't exist, go create one. And then an assumptions log. Pretty standard document. I'm assuming all of you are familiar with the assumptions log. If you're not, think of it like, anything else. It's just a place to log your assumptions, who came up with it. You may have deadline and status. So, are you guys sure that shrieking, that you don't hear that?
Oh, we hear it. It's just not all that bothersome.
Okay. All right. Oh, my microphone is doing its job over here. Okay. You know what it is? It's the parent ears. We all hear our own children's, noises. That's what that is.
All right. It's part of life, man. It's nobody else.
Well, I appreciate you guys being flexible. So thank you. All right. So business case. We kind of talked about this one earlier. So we're going to dive a little bit deeper. All right. Determine if the expected outcomes exceed the required investment. Basically, the effort we're about to put in, are we going to get more back? That's really what we're it's an investment. Are we going to make some money off of this? And sometimes the money's not always quantifiable. It may be, increased satisfaction, right? But are we going to get something? So it allows us to initiate the development, of an economic feasibility, because it's always going to come back to money for the exam. So you see me here, the economic feasibility. The exam is always going to tie it back to money, and money is, can be measured in terms of market demand or, a customer request. You may have to do it, for a requirement. So defines the objectives, the reasons, and the assumptions of a project. But it helps to create the charter because it helps you to calculate if you can actually do this thing, and it justifies, a go or no go decision. So that's the idea of the business case. The agreements, that's the term PMI is going to use that's synonymous with contracts. So sometimes they may call it contracts, sometimes they may call it agreements, but that's what this word is for PMI. So a contract, an MOU, if you're familiar with that, SLAs, service level agreements. So, all of these terms here sort of are blanketed under the word agreements for PMI moving forward. We good with that? Okay. And then when you're creating a charter, here's the EEFs. As I mentioned earlier, would be government or industry, organizational culture, marketplace conditions. Like these are the things that are sort of outside of our control. And then here's what the company has that allows us to not reinvent the wheel, the templates, any governance issues that you may have to take into account. All right, large project, might need it. Small project, you may not. Expert judgment. Expertise can come from anyone with specialized education. And it's funny that when we say that, so just understand that as an expert, doesn't mean that you're a certified expert, right? It just means that you know, at a particular company, whoever knows the most in a particular, you know, subject or topic, they become the subject matter expert. So for the exam, you know, sort of take that, you know, tongue in cheek. It doesn't mean that they're the expert in the world. Data gathering. Now, here's what's interesting, John. You'll appreciate this because you no longer have to memorize the fact that brainstorming, focus groups, and interviews are tools and techniques. You just need to know that data gathering is a tool and technique, and there's many different types. All right, so I think you all understand brainstorming. It's what we do the most. Let's just come up with as many ideas as we can. All right, the focus groups. I want to mention this for PMI, for focus groups. So in regular industry, as I understand it, in my experience, focus groups is a specific number, 6 people, and it's random, 6 random people. For PMI, right, that's for just industry, that's a focus group. For PMI, a focus group is 2 or more subject matter experts, right? So as long as they share the same domain knowledge, that's a focus group. So, you know, so to make sure that we key in on that sort of a slight difference there. Not even slight, it's a very big difference, right? From 6 random people to 6 subject matter experts of the same, or 2 or more subject matter experts of the same domain expertise. That's what a focus group is. And interviews, straightforward. And by the way, interviews, you know, I know it's known, but it's not stated. It's can happen over the phone, video, chat. It can even be, you know, an email interview, right? Back and forth. So you may see the exam, you know, use different versions of that. So just want to point that out. We talked about interpersonal team skills when I was describing how you would actually develop a charter. You might use your conflict and facilitation management, meeting management, sort of work the room. And this is one of the, you know, for PMI, and we talked about that talent triangle earlier. This is what you as a PM, the kind of skills that you need to exude the most, is to really be able to facilitate and manage conflicts in meetings.